Welcome to the All In Community Podcast, Faith Rooted Advocacy. My name is Reba Collins, and I am the All In Community Consultant for the West Ohio Conference. And I am so excited to have with me today Wendy Tarr from the Vincentian Ohio Action Network. She's also one of our All In community leaders within the conference, and we're going to be talking today about faith-rooted advocacy and how we can organize to make a greater impact in what's going on in the criminal justice system within the state of Ohio. So welcome, Wendy. We're so glad to have you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Reba. So I'm excited to share with you all today about this topic. I've been involved in organizing in faith communities for almost 15 years on advocacy issues, including here in Ohio for the last 4 years, working with issues of reentry and public policy and faith communities. So it's my pleasure to share about this topic because I think that in the work that we do in our community, we are uniquely positioned to be able to be a part of the larger conversation in the state of Ohio about criminal justice and reentry, and also to be able to use our experiences and lifting up the voices and stories and leaders that we work with who are our brothers and sisters returning from jails and prisons. I think in order to start with this topic, it's really important to think about, what is it that moves us in the work that we're doing? And in many ways, in order to tap into your passion and into movements for change, recognizing like where your heart breaks, I think is really important. And I know that we do this work because we care about people. And when you see what happens in the lives of many of the people that we are in community with, it's hard for it not to break your heart. And I think sometimes it's easy for us to not sit with that pain because it's painful. But I also think that God speaks to us through that process, and we know, it's important to be able to sit with the things that break our heart and figure out where is it that God is leading us forward in order to be agents of transformation. And when we sit with the things that are going on, you will begin to recognize there's a lot that's broken in the world. It's not just individual choices, but it's larger systems and structures. And that's kind of what we're talking about today with the faith-rooted organizing and advocacy training. When we look at how to make change, there's a kind of a spectrum of ways to make change. And I did a webinar before, so a few of these things in the beginning may be repetitive, so bear with me real quick, but just to lay a foundation. If you see somebody who is hungry or in need, there's this whole sort of story about you can give somebody a fish, which means they need clothes, you give them clothes. Great, you're doing something for them. And I think that in the church, we have a lot of programs that do this. It's very, very important because it meets an immediate need, but it doesn't change the fact that a person doesn't have the tools for themselves to sustain themselves. So if you move kind of forward on a continuum, you could teach a person to fish, give them education and training, individual development for their own self-agency, so that a person may be able to provide for their needs without you doing something for them, which is really important. Fishing together, so moving beyond just trying to equip one person to help themselves. A lot of times, we know community is so important, and we need to have people working together in order to strengthen the success of those efforts. And so, it may give people a job, but teach them how to work, but you may want to teach them how to start their own business and work together to, have an alternative to do for themselves in a larger system. But, hey, if everybody's working together, kind of start a business, but then you realize nobody's going to lease you office space in this part of town where you want to open your business for these larger, because maybe there's discrimination or people are there's brokenness in the community and not everybody has equal access. So that's where organizing and advocacy steps in. It's looking at those larger systems that impact our lives. What are the laws and policies and structures? And it's talking about our lives together, our public decision-making process. And, we have privilege in this country to have a democracy, and making sure our democracy works is really important. And that includes voting. It includes using your voice to influence and to talk about issues, and how we talk to people and influence the thinking of leaders who have been voted to represent our best interests. And it's easy to become cynical, and we have good reason to be cynical, but if we are not participating and we're cynical so much that we drop out, it kind of further creates problems in our society, because we're sort of opting out of a system that's meant to be there in order to provide a better community for everyone.
We went to a conference not too long ago, and it was eye-opening to understand from a presentation that a lady gave about the systems. We are living with systems that were developed 40 years ago, and they're all conspiring through this 40-year period to create this issue that we have right now of mass incarceration in our country. And with so many folks coming home, now we have mass return to community. And so, this is an area that we're going to lean into more this coming year, because there are some systems that need to be dismantled, that need to be challenged, or we're going to continue to have more communities that are in distress. We're going to continue to have more folks going to prison, and we're going to continue to just perpetuate this pain. But until we know what those systems are, right, and can recognize them for what they are and how they are making an impact, we won't be able to really make large-scale systemic change. So I love this webinar because it's the beginning of that journey.
Yeah, and the system that we have, our criminal justice system, is fully in the realm of public decision making and policy. It absolutely is about our county commissioners, our state legislators, our governor, at the federal level. I mean, it's like all up and down our system of elected government that oversees our criminal justice system. So, there may be other areas of work where policy and change can lie outside of our government system, but it is 100%. We're not, it's very, very heavily linked into that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important for us to hang in there and to have a vision for what we're trying to do, so that we can begin to influence those systems. So I think another way to think about this, what breaks your heart, what do you love, and how do you begin to address change? This is just a simple little graph to sort of explain. Sometimes people can be a little bit confused, or they see a problem and we sort of if we haven't ever done advocacy and organizing, it's easy to kind of respond to a lot of problems with a direct service modality and fall into that rhythm without necessarily recognizing it. And so I think, meaning that we may be leaving out these other areas of ways to love people. And so if we have direct service, you can see some of the ways that you could address problems like hunger or education in schools, or problems with healthcare or employment. But then community development is a whole nother area, and then the broader systems. And I think it's important for us in our faith communities and in our lives to sort of look at, what are the things that we've been involved with, and have we looked into these other areas, or how much time do we dedicate to thinking about how we can structure our involvement and our volunteer time or our programs to look into these issues, understanding the root causes and developing intelligent models to begin to address those problems. And then that's just sort of what this is, sort of trying to look at, because if you create a soup kitchen, you may be able to serve just however many bodies come through that soup kitchen in one day. But if you address, a larger problem of policies, you may be impacting what goes on in your whole entire state or something like that. And so it has a wider reach. So this kind of moves us into the question of organizing, because in order to address larger systems, you have to have a whole nother approach of gathering people and motivating processes for change. And in organizing, we start with a problem. So the problem can be mass incarceration, right? Or our problem can be lots of people coming home to the community without the jobs or housing or the tools that they need to make that transition successfully. Okay, but in order to begin to organize ourselves around addressing those problems, we have to get more specific, because just saying we're going to address reentry or mass incarceration and that's sort of the end of it, that doesn't help us begin to chip away at any kind of concrete issue within this larger problem. So we have to move to particulars. And we'll talk about process for that a little bit further in the webinar. Building power. Really, power is about having the ability to act. That's what that means. I think power in our society, when we think about things, is oftentimes kind of perceived, at least for a lot of us in the faith community, that word can be a little bit alarming, because power is often used as a way to power over people or harm people. Power tends to feel a little scary. But I think power, when this situation is really talking about, you can have power under, power with, power behind a group of people. It's about how to have the ability to take action versus being powerless. We don't want to be powerless. We want to have, right, power. We know that God gives us the ability to do that, to have influence, to be able to make change. But there's a way to build your ability to influence and to have power for good, power for the kingdom, for the vision of the beloved community. That's what we're talking about. Power with a purpose, not to overlord and harm people. That's driven by our values and our principles. That's driven by our dreams and our visions for the type of community that we want to create, and that we believe that God is calling us towards. And then, finding common sacred ground through shared dreams for our community. There may be people that we want to bring together to organize, to build a larger group of people working towards something. And sometimes if you're talking about particular issues, you may find that when you get into the weeds, you can differ, which is this life. It's important to have good, good, healthy dialogue, but we can organize together around our shared dreams, and what is the end goal. And I think that helps kind of move people forward, and it's something that we need to work on in this country, about kind of what is it that we all want to have for ourselves. We all want to have a safe place to live. We all want to have enough food and clothing. We may differ with how we think we want to get there. But how can we recognize that we all kind of basically, I think, share more in common for what we want to have for ourselves and for our own loved ones and for ultimately, our neighbors. And so it's just something to think about, especially if you come across people when you differ, to think about what is that you share in common.
Right. You have to get back to, every mom wants their child to be safe and healthy and have a good education. Of how you get to that differs. But if, as those iron sharpening iron takes place, it's a matter of, okay, let's get back to what are we here for, right? What do we all want to see happen?
Right.
And is there value in what you're saying? Is there value in what I'm saying? And maybe we create something new and different that neither one of us had imagined was possible. So,
right. So in our components of organizing, you have to have a goal. You're going to organize for change. You have to have a goal of where you're trying to go. And I think that, if the problem is mass incarceration or reentry, what is the goal? And the goal can be a very sort of a more visionary thing, right? Our goal is for people to have rehabilitation and for there to be a restorative system, that heals people and brings them back to the community in a healthy, safe place that everybody has a place to be and to thrive. Or the goal, there's lots of different goals. I don't want to get too much into that, but, you have a vision for what you're trying to accomplish that's driving you forward, that holds you together. The analysis is about researching what's been broken down. Like, how did we get to where we are? In organizing, you have strategies for how do we get towards the goal? What are the strategies and tactics that we can do to try to make change? Recruiting, got to bring more people together, because especially if we're talking about government change, it is a lot about people. It's about lots of people sharing a vision. And so we'll get to some of that because our political leaders are not inclined to do things that are risky. They want to see that their constituents are not going to vote them out if they do something, and especially around criminal justice issues, it becomes one of those topics where people don't want to do something and get, they let somebody out or they make a change and somebody gets harmed, and then that becomes the thing that everybody thinks about. So people are very nervous. So how we talk about and think about these issues in our broader society will play a role, I believe, in how our political leaders will approach it. And then leadership development and organizing, you have to develop leaders, and people need to have tools and things to be able to make change, and then sustaining the struggle, because sometimes, the types of changes we're talking about can take years.
Well, they're complex, right? They're complex.
Many generations. Yeah, they're complex.
And so it takes a while to dismantle a complex issue.
Right. So we want to have kind of footholds. You make momentum towards a larger goal, but we're not going to probably realize the vision that we have in our lifetime. You pass it on to the next generation. And so how can we, if we're dedicated to this type of transformation of the world, how can we sustain ourselves in that? And I think from being people of faith, we have so much richness in our tradition and our texts and our worship and our prayers and our community. Those are the things that we lean into to sustain ourselves. And I think it's important to remember that, because sometimes when people are trying to make these types of changes, people can get very bogged down, and we have to remember to celebrate and have joy and have community, and realize that, you know, we are just part of a larger story. We're doing our part.
Good point.
All right. We have a vision. We want to move from a problem to an issue. So how this in organizing world, they call it cutting an issue. You know, cutting it down to something that you can touch, a measurable, smart, measurable goal, achievable. You know, those types of things. You research. You know, like Reba was saying, what is the roots of this problem that we've got? And there's a lot of people that do those presentations, and there's lots of books we can read, and all of that is important. What are the roots of this problem? What is the history of the problem and the history of solutions, of people that have been making changes? As we look at ourselves here in Ohio and in your region, in your district, what are the assets and the opportunities and the partners that lay ahead? Like, who is around us? We're not doing this on our own. We're not in a vacuum. But, you know, we want to be part of a larger momentum. So we want to know what's being done, what's not being done, you know, and what are we suited to do? What are the things that we can uniquely bring, and how the timing goes. So that's all part of an analysis. And it's just important. So as we think about issues that we may bring forward in organizing down the future, you know, it gives a context for that, so that you don't be overwhelmed with the fact that this is a complex problem, but there's, you know, we need a process to move us forward. And then faith-rooted organizing, you know, which is what this presentation is about, is really also recognizing that all of those things are valuable to lay out, to be able to prioritize issues and understand issues, but also we know that the Spirit is moving. And not everything that we may do is necessarily going to be the most rational, logical thing that we've distilled through a logic model. It may be that the Spirit is putting something, what is breaking our heart, like what is moving us forward, and it may be something that we didn't particularly come to through mental analysis, but there's this God's timing, something is opening up. And so there's this process of discernment that's really important, and that we as people of faith are going to bring into any of our works for justice. And I think it's important to say that, because sometimes in larger conversations of change, that can be, you know, not what everybody else is talking about. So I just want to empower us to think about that as we approach these issues.
This sounds a lot like doing our homework, preparation. And as we know, preparation takes time. It takes study. It takes learning about areas perhaps of ourselves and our culture and of the Spirit that we hadn't ventured into before. And I think your point about, you know, the Spirit moving, we come from we bring a different lens. And so there are folks in communities. I was in the Foothills District yesterday, and Dr. Mike Davis, our friend from the Office of Reentry, was talking about all the different groups and agencies that are in communities that are trying to help folks successfully reintegrate. Everybody is coming from their own lens to that. We have, I believe, a broader lens to see humanity as God wants us to be. And like you said, that doesn't often get introduced into the cutting of an issue. It's more like, what's our next logical step? What's our strategy? But then, you know, when you interject and say, I feel the power from higher than we are, saying we need to stop, pause, look at this. It can, I believe, create fundamental shifts in how
Yes.
we do this work.
100%. And we're going to talk about that, because if we're in that stream, other things will open up that we may be able to see in our partnership with the Spirit of God. The other thing I just want to mention, Kairos is God's timing, which is just sometimes just happens in ways we didn't expect. And then this part here where it says lies and divine truth. Part of our role is to speak the truth amidst what the world says that is, lies. So is it when we talk about the humanity of all people, that everyone is created in the image of God and everybody has sinned and fallen short and can be redeemed, like what are the lies that people believe that justifies the system that we do have, and what is the truth that liberates and sets free? And that's a very prophetic kind of role, but that is who we are as church. And some people may be really tapping into that or wanting to bring that forward, and it's really important to hear that and to say, well, how can our work bringing that forward perhaps open up and shift within these movements? Yeah. Okay. Working in change, there's this thing I'm going to talk about: wise as serpents and innocent as doves. So Jesus said this. I want you to be wise as a serpent and innocent as a dove. Here's a story of called serpent wisdom. It's not meant to be like evil, but more just like cunning, and practical. If there's a judge who neither fears God nor regards man, so this is a person, an official, a public official who doesn't care about people. So it's not always possible that what we're going to talk about with dove power is always necessarily the way to go. You got to discern. This person is not particularly open, very hard heart. So what are you going to do? You're going to keep going, and you're going to wear them down, and you're going to continue, wear them out by their coming. And oh my gosh, can this woman leave me alone? I'm going to give her what she wants. That's in the Bible. So that is in the Bible. Jesus teaches us that in a parable. And so I think that this is not to say that we shouldn't consider that as a tactic. We have to know who we're talking to. And I think that that's important. She gets what she wanted through that process. But there's also this question about dove power. And what do we mean by that? Frederick Douglass said that power never sees power without a struggle. But the struggle we talk about can sometimes be within the soul, within the heart of a person. And so in Dove Power, we're talking about being an ally of the Holy Spirit to that person. This is very much pastoral and about sort of discipleship if our person that we're talking to is a person of faith. Yeah. Human beings are not targets in traditional community organizing. A lot of times you put up a whole strategy plan and you put the person that you want to change, that you want to get to do the thing, and you're like, that's our target. And being a target doesn't feel very good. That means somebody's probably coming to shoot at you, but we talk about having, but you do need to know who we're trying to influence. We also talk about in Dove Power that the poor have the power already. We talk about the kingdom being an upside down kingdom, and that God's ways are not the ways of the world, and that there is power. We talk about the Jesus and the Sermon on the Mount, that there's power in that humility, in that when people who are often discarded by the world come forward, it's like amazing things can happen. And so it's not necessarily about getting the most powerful person that has the most influence and money and the celebrity to come and speak about this issue to make change. That can make change, but also the person who is maybe the most marginalized person, our folks that we're serving have power to make change. When they tell their story, it can shift the whole room in a way that a celebrity doesn't. And I think that we've all experienced that And so when we talk to people who are decision makers, recognizing that that the folks that carry the most, that may be the least, that seem to be seen in the eyes of the world as the least powerful, may in fact, and are in fact, given the gifts of tools to make change. And that's a lens, a spiritual lens that we know and need to account for in our work. Faith-rooted organizing also recognizes that, you know, Scripture teaches us that God has a call for people in leadership, in government. He expects that they would judge people with righteousness and the poor with justice, and to give deliverance to the needy. And so, you know, we know God is a God who is compassionate and present with those who are being crushed by injustice. And so when we engage people who are political leaders or people in positions of influence and policy-making power, that we recognize if we're aiding with the Spirit and what they're being called to do, that it is also recognizing how Scripture teaches it. It gives us power and vision to do that. It's not common that people go into a meeting with a public leader and start it out with prayer. But if this is a person of faith, and if you feel inclined to do that, you should do that. You can start your meeting with your representative and say, I'd like to, you know, can we pray for a minute? Now, that can be taken a lot of different ways, but I think that I've seen that be so, it's just not what people do when they go into those meetings, and I think we should be empowered to do it. It sets the tone for the meeting in a completely different direction, and it opens up the space sometimes in a way that would otherwise have been done.
That's a good point. Wow.
So chaplaincy, giving courage. Encouragement means about giving courage to a person. It is not easy to necessarily pass laws and to reduce the prison population and just show compassion towards people who society wants to lock away and throw away the key. And so part of our role is to recognize that the people that we are talking to are regular people who are just like us, struggling with how other people perceive them. It is not easy to do something that's unpopular, and people are scared. Okay, so chaplaincy is about giving courage and caring for someone, and they may not demonstrate that level of humility in front of you, but we know that that's people how they are. Yeah. You know, so anyway, the prophetic call is also about remembering the poor. We're a body, and you know, I'm going to put this in the frame of criminal justice. We're a body, and everybody's connected, but the people who are poor and marginalized, the people who are coming out of prison, it's like they've been removed from the body and cast to the side, like they're not connected to society. And so our role is to remember, calling our leaders to remember the poor and to think about bringing them back into the body and how they connect to our society. I think how we talk about people and how we do that work is important. The dreams and visions is about, you know, your vision. What was your vision and your goal? How can you bring that vision and goal into the room when you talk to a decision maker about the vision of what we're trying to accomplish, and not just the particularities of, we want this bill for blah, 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 blah. We want to cast a vision to create that opening up in somebody's heart to see what it is we're trying to accomplish, and then how maybe this particular issue is going to move us towards that. Exposing and combating the lies is about what is the lies that may justify this. That's not that's about demeaning people or whatever. You know, what is it that our faith teaches us that gets us towards that dream and vision? And then reaching both sides of the brain, that has to do with it's not just about the giving the argument about how a particular change, you know, is, you know, it's fiscally responsible, and in many ways it will be, and that's important to explain. But, you know, sometimes there may be there's other things that we can bring into the room, and I don't know, I want to go into this so much here, but how you maybe you have a letter or a poem from somebody that's in prison or that's come out of prison that speaks to, the other side of the brain, that's not the logical side of the brain, that gets underneath those arguments, that helps show, it kind of speaks to the soul in a different kind of way. And we don't approach our leaders with that type of persuasion, if you will, but I think that it's important to think about. We won't have time to go into that today, but we could talk about that in other spaces.
Is it kind of like you have the part of the brain that's facts and figures, and then you have the part of the brain that is human connection?
Yes.
Right?
Yes. So you can be, and I'm not in movement work, people can go and do a march and have a slogan that they're marching and things on their signs, that or whatever, for some social issue that you're talking about. But what if people were marching and singing a hymn that was getting at the same message? Mm-hmm. It feels so different.
Right.
And I think that, song and poetry and symbols, we understand symbols in our faith tradition. We use them all the time. It's just another way to reach people. And when we think about social change and just people that we're trying to talk to, those are things we should really consider. I think it's things that we uniquely bring as people of faith that we may be a little more in tune with, perhaps. Okay.
Sorry.
Yep. No. Okay. I'm going to move past this. This is about standard tools of influence, constituency, connections, and case. So when you go to meet with somebody to talk to them about an issue, a lot of times you really want to know who else moves this person. And these are very practical questions. Who are they connected to? Who's donated to their campaign? What kind of boards are they on? Is their brother or somebody in your congregation, right? What motivates them? What are they most interested in? What is their legacy? What do they campaign on? How do you fit your issue within what's going to move them, right?
Got it.
So that's very standard. Okay. And it's not to leave it off. You should know that if you can. And then other things about organizing, relationships matter. So when we are going to do any of this type of work, we want to identify who has the power to make the changes that we need. We have an issue, we want to make change, get real personal. Get a specific person or a set of people, not just a group, not just like the House of Representatives or the Senate Judiciary Committee. We just want to move the Senate Judiciary Committee. Well, that's actually made up of particular people, and who, there's a chair of that committee, or there's a legislator in your district that is a particular person. Like, understand who that person is, not just like a random group of people. What motivates them, all of these things. And then I think also with organizing and change, there's a question about moving the current system. Like if we're trying to reform the system, we're trying to make a system different and better. But then there's also this idea of building alternatives to the system that get close to the change that we seek. So, could try to get a system to do something, or you can also create alternatives that hold up a better example for change. And it's like alternative polis. We talk about that in some of our theology. Actions for persuasion. There's a lot of different ways to try to persuade and speak out about the vision and the change that we have. Could include any number of these things. And also, it's when we're talking about social change, and we talk about this over the course of generations, sometimes the things that we're advocating for are not going to happen immediately. So there's like a continuum of shift. So, an issue is the first one would be just a shift in definition. So, for example, is addiction a disease, or is it a moral failing? That's one of the conversations we're having in our society, but that's a shift in a definition of what it means to have addiction. And when you make a shift in the definition, it begins to set things in a completely different direction. So just that alone is opening up opportunities in the future for different types of change in policy. Then it shifts in behavior. So I'm just talking about mental health and addiction as the example in here, but people are seeking treatment more, or they're sharing more openly about this thing because they feel less stigma, because it's not about their moral failing, it's about this medical public health problem, and people are empowered to do that, and it begins to make social change more possible. Shifts in engagement. Maybe people are opening sober houses or coming to meetings and coming to presentations. And then you could have a shift in policy where and as you can see, the policy is often way after all these other things, because policymakers are not often risk takers. They're oftentimes at the back of the train. You want to talk to them about, you are the visionary, you get them in front of this big movement, but in many ways, it's like licking your finger and sticking it up in the wind and seeing which way it's going. So we have to create the momentum of that wind and then urge our leaders to get into the moment and be on the right side of history. And then maintaining and holding the line. Sometimes social change is also about protecting against erosion of change that has already occurred. There's gains that have been made, and sometimes the change is honestly about just protecting the gains so that they don't get eroded.
This social change sounds a lot like personal change as well. Whenever we see evidence of somebody moving more towards kingdom-like behavior, more seeing themselves more as a child of God, shifting how they engage with other people, is very, to me, very parallel. And your example too of policy shifts often comes after these other shifts that have occurred. I think one of the lies we tell ourselves is that our political leaders are actually the leaders of, right? Of social change. And what you're really saying is it's not necessarily the case. And so that's a lie that we have to expose. Not to them per se, but to those that we're working with in the community. And that gives us power.
Yes. And I think that what kind of momentum and what's going on in our larger community, in many ways, our political leaders may just be like a mirror, like it's a reflection back of what is sort of going on. Because people can be okay with, a person in power, and, sometimes they keep getting reelected. It asks a deeper question. So I think it should empower us to be more vocal and more thoughtful about, what is our role in our society to drive these other pieces where we do have some more control. I don't know.
Yep, I agree. Okay.
Criminal justice reform topics in Ohio. This webinar was meant to sort of discuss some of the nuts and bolts of talking about advocacy and kind of getting the conversation going. But ultimately, I think all in community, there's an interest to be a part of particulars, like what are some of the so when we have a problem, like what are some of those issues, what are some of the ways we can cut that down, and there will be and there is folks in our state legislature, there are organizations throughout Ohio that are working on their own in their own space to begin to carve out and address. They're creating position papers and data and all these different things that they're doing around these types of issues. Reducing the prison population is a big one. There's a lot of ways to do it, but that's a big one. Barriers to put, the collateral consequences, the challenges that people face when they get out. There's organizations focused on that, and legislators involved with that. I think the public defenders, we talk about oh, wow, we have so many people in our prison system because people just take plea deals and they can't afford, they don't have good representation, you know, poor people who are in the system who get to talk to a lawyer for 10 minutes and the person doesn't even know their name and they're like flipping through the binder and it's just like, it's like assembly line justice. It's disturbing, and there's some effort to work on that from the left and the right. So here are some of the things that I just have, and then there's local issues, you know, the problems at the Cuyahoga County Jail. Somebody's in that region, you know, man, there's a moment because that stuff got exposed big time through the Serial podcast, in fact. And, you know, things like that can make a huge difference, but there's a huge level of momentum. So there's local stuff that's in your area that may be things that you're aware of and you may want to consider, you know, what's going on with that. And then there's also policymakers and leaders that have just changed. We just got we had an election and a new governor, and all these new people are involved in, again, it's particular people, right, that hold these roles of you know, policy making. And here's a few of them. Recovery Ohio is a new initiative. It's focused on drug abuse and mental health. And a lot of the things that are going on, like that post-issue 1 conversation, is going to be coming, I think, in many ways in dialogue or even through that body, that task force that's meant to help vet and figure out where is the direction of our state. And also drug sentencing and those issues, you know, we've been told that in the top 10 bills that the governor is going to introduce is going to be around how we're addressing drug charges through our criminal justice system. So the Supreme Court created a task force to work on bail reform. So there's a lot of opportunities. And I think that that's something that's really exciting. Getting to know people in your area, local matters, local, you know, all politics is local. Who are the people in charge of your mental health and addiction task force in your community? Where is your reentry coalition? You know, we talk about going to the reentry coalitions to understand services that we hope folks would be doing, but it's also about building relationships with other people of influence and understanding their analysis of the challenges and figuring out how to work together. Go have lunch with these people. Find out why they do what they do. What is the vision that they have? What is the dream that they have? Because a lot of times people can also get bogged down, and we have to continue to inspire and collaborate with people in order to make change. And I've been really encouraged by so many people in government and social services that I've gotten to know, that there's so much shared vision. And there's people in these roles that have gotten into these roles because they really wanted to make major change, and they're stuck in a bureaucracy that, you know, sometimes fights against that. So we have to collaborate together, and so that's one of the opportunities that we have.
Well, with All in Community, we talk about co-mission and co-location, right? We can't operate in a vacuum. We've got to find those that are allies in our community, whether they be another faith organization, another church, doesn't have to be Methodist. Reentry coalitions are an awesome place to start. There is a reentry footprint in every county. It may not be a coalition. It could be a person that's working at Job and Family Services or someone like that. But there is a reentry footprint, and by reentry, the reentry has tentacles out into, you know, recovery and all these other community dynamics and all these other community services that help a person successfully re-enter society as a productive citizen. It involves families, it involves
jobs. Ohio means jobs, family
victims,
services,
all kinds of things. So there are those things. So our next steps are going to be where Wendy is so gracious with her time, because she's like super uber busy trying to organize things in her primary job. but she is willing to help facilitate and help continue to educate us and help us figure out what our next steps what your next steps are, where you currently reside. Again, co-mission, co-location. So we would love to hear from you as far as what you would be interested in knowing more about, because Zoom meetings, conference, we have technology where we can meet over our computers and have discussion, can have a speaker come in, talk about things, talk about issues that maybe we can organize around. And it doesn't have to be that the whole conference is wanting to organize around one issue. Again, it could be that there are 3 or 4 of you out there that want to do some organizing around a particular reform issue, bail bonds, jail, reentry services, anything like that. Doesn't even have to be within the criminal justice system, but because there are a lot of systems that are touching, that are running parallel with and in concert with. So what we will do is, after this webinar, is we will send out information to our all-in community contacts, asking if there are, maybe even we do a survey that says, here are some of the things that are happening based on that list you provided. Are you interested in learning more about those? And then set up some monthly, bi-monthly Zoom meetings to start that work. So I just want to say thank you, Wendy, for coming and doing this webinar with us. And we really look forward to moving further into this and just being inspired to lend our voices. I think the key takeaway for me was that whole piece about those shifts that happen prior to the policy shifts that occur. And that really opened up my eyes, at least, to the fact that we have a voice and we have a particular role that we can start playing, that doesn't require us to travel to Columbus and meet with the Judicial Committee or the Supreme Court or anything like that, that it is local, it is happening in our communities, and we can make that difference. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
And as you can see on the screen, there's Wendy's information, there's my information. Please, email us, let us know what's on your mind, let us know how we can help and assist in the work that you now are being called to and inspired to do.